at 10:16. We welcome back into Studio C. His name is David Stokes. He is with the Show Me Institute in St. Louis. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm doing great, Manny. Great to be on, as it is great each week with you and your listeners.
Well, this week we are going to be talking about rate increases for utilities. And this is, to me, it's always been kind of fascinating because this does happen from time to time. And usually it's the bigger companies that get a lot of the attention. Ameren, Laclede, Mid-American Water. I mean, those are some of the bigger ones here in the state of Missouri. And let's talk about that a little bit because that will have an impact here on the lake area. It's not a huge number of people here at the lake, but it looks like there are some hearings coming up in Jefferson City next year.
There are. The Lake Region Water and Sewer Company, which serves a good number of families in the lake area, sounds like about 800 to 900 different families and homes. They're having a hearing for some rate increases, which by percentage basis are pretty large, but oftentimes justified, and that's why we have our Public Service Commission system here. Private utilities are heavily regulated in Missouri. They're regulated both by the Department of Natural Resources for what they do and by the Public Service Commission for what they charge. And, it is important to allow for these rate increases to go forward in many cases because this is what allows the companies to reinvest in their infrastructure to keep infrastructure up to what we need in Missouri.
It's an interesting process that the utilities go through. They just can't raise your rates. They actually, there are rules and regulations they have to follow.
Oh, it is extremely complicated. They're allowed a certain return on their investment, and how they set these rates to get that return on their investment is heavily regulated by the Public Service Commission and state law. I mean, just the process alone is so complicated and time-consuming that it adds cost to each person's bill because every time they undergo it, it costs them thousands of dollars, if not more, for the legal work and accounting work necessary to get a rate increase. For the government-owned utilities in the state, it's a much simpler process.
This then sets up a very interesting conversation because now you start to bring in a lot of different entities to the table. You're starting to talk now about public and private utility companies, and it also brings up the entire notion of regulation or deregulation of utilities. Is that, when you start throwing all of that together, is that also what makes the process so lengthy?
It absolutely does, and I do find it fascinating myself, and it's something that affects every one of us. This is not some sort of esoteric economic discussion. And everybody has the water company, the gas company, the electric company, and everybody pays those bills each month. So it is very, very important. And how Missouri does utilities varies greatly. We have areas like St. Louis County, in which all of the utilities are provided by private investor-owned companies. And then we have areas like Springfield, which has one behemoth government-owned utility, City Utilities of Springfield, which provides every service there. And then we have in St. Louis and Kansas City, it tends to be mostly private, but they have public water departments. And in different areas of the Ozarks, you might have municipal water companies or a private water company, although most of the gas and electric in the Ozark area, I think, is privately provided. I'm happy to be corrected there. But it varies greatly as you go around the state, and it's very interesting to me in how this plays out.
Is it better, and this is totally an opinion question for you, are you more in favor of public utility or private?
Well, I do have an opinion on that one, and I'm glad you asked. No, I'm definitely in favor of private regulated utilities. I sort of subscribe to the Yellow Pages test. I don't think government should provide certain services if there's private businesses out there doing that same service. And the Yellow Pages test, which I guess I'm dating myself with my age as I remember the Yellow Pages, that was a term coined by former mayor of Indianapolis, Stephen Goldsmith. And when the private sector is capable of providing a service, I think it should, and I don't think the government should do that. Now, in cases like utilities, there's absolutely going to be a role for regulation of the private sector in that instance. So I'm not saying the government should get out of the utility business completely. It it needs regulation as long as we have the monopoly model, the regulated monopoly model in our state. But like telephones and like cable television, it's my hope over time we can add competition to some of these utilities and move away from the monopoly model.
I think it also brings up an interesting conversation because every time you get a major utility, Ameren, for example, a few years ago went with what was going to be a legitimate, or I should say, a very high rate hike. Now, to their credit, they said it was because of increased fuel costs. I mean, they had a long list of why they wanted this major increase in electric rates, and they do service some, actually quite a few people here in the Lake of the Ozarks area. Are those good reasons for utilities to ask for rate increases?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I mean, things change in the utility industry dramatically. I mean, we all think about how energy prices spike, and then you find the new natural gas fields throughout the country that have lowered energy costs around the country and to the benefit of all of us. So yes, I mean, one of the problems with the heavily regulated system we have is it is so time-consuming that it doesn't allow for fast reactions to price changes by the utilities. And that's not necessarily bad. It's really more inevitable. It's the system we have. It's a system that on the whole works. But yeah, I mean, it requires utilities to try and really predict into the future where they're going to be, because the whole pricing system and to go to the Public Service Commission takes such a long time. And sometimes those predictions are going to be right, and sometimes they're going to be way off. And it looks like the utility is trying to mislead people when it's really more just, it's hard to predict the future. That's one thing I always say about government planning and these types of things. It is impossible to predict the future.
And it really is a situation as well, because there's so many infrastructure elements that make up these different companies, be it the electric companies, the gas companies. And then if you throw in, for example, you might have a utility go down because of a weather situation, or they have an equipment failure of some type, then that also ends up in the equation.
Absolutely, and keeping up with the infrastructure is so important. And one of the problems with government-owned utilities, and I'm not thinking any specifically in the Ozarks right now, just speaking generally, is that too often prices are kept low for political purposes because they're run by the government. This mayor and city council and other elected officials set the prices, so there's a political reward to keeping rates low. And because they keep rates low, over the long run, that reduces investment in the system. And that leads to, again, in the long run, eventually you're going to have increased infrastructure problems. And I think we're seeing that in our larger cities in the state with some of the water and sewer investments in St. Louis and Kansas City, where you've had the EPA come in and say you are not investing enough, and now they're having to raise rates substantially in the sewers and in the water system to address EPA concerns.
We're talking with David Stokes of the Show Me Institute here on this week's edition of Show Me at the Lake on News Talk 1150 and 97.5 KRMS. Going down the road, it really doesn't, it's a very complicated process, David, but it really doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon for utilities when they want to raise rates on their customers.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I think I'd like to see, as technological changes come into play, and as our current utilities can be deregulated, if ever, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see competition brought in whenever possible. I mean, your listeners can remember it wasn't that long ago where cable television and our telephones were treated like regulated utilities, and how technology has made those points almost completely moot. Now we have more competition than we can even imagine in the phone industry with all the cell phone companies out there. And now the satellite companies have entered the cable television market and provided competition there. So you don't need to maintain those systems as regulated utilities anymore. Now, I think it's going to be much harder for the larger, more mainline utilities, gas, water, electric. But eventually, I hope we do get competition and technological improvements in those areas. But no doubt, for the foreseeable future, it's going to be this system, and you're going to have these rate increases that get debated every couple of years. Nobody likes to see the substantial jumps. I mean, the Lake region increase and for residential usage is going to be about $8 a month, which by a percentage term is a lot. But as long as that is being reinvested in the system, I think it's probably necessary.
One other element here, and it's not necessarily something happening in the lake area yet, but it's always a possibility. When you talk about green energy, and as some utility companies have gone to public service commissions throughout this country and said, we need a rate increase for enhancements because we want to use more green energy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, right. It does strike people as strange. They're using more green energy, so they have to increase prices to do things which are supposed to, in theory, reduce prices in the long run. But look, I love green energy. As I drive through Kansas and I see the wind farms, which are all over central Kansas, I mean, that they're doing some great things there. That said, other than water out west, the hydropower out there, I mean, renewable energy is just not set, solar or wind or others, to provide the type of baseline energy needs that our area needs, that Missouri needs, that our country needs. And there's really no hope in any type of foreseeable future for renewable energy to be much more than something that can sort of offset our energy demands. And to the extent that it does that, that's great. But we're still going to be depending on coal and nuclear here in Missouri for some time for our electrical needs.
One of the things that we did want to briefly discuss is an event that is happening. It's not too far up the road, and actually, it's kind of interesting, David, because it involves the speaker is actually somebody that I know very well. Actually, somebody I worked with in my previous radio stop in the state of Missouri. And tell us about what's happening there in Columbia. I believe it's next week. Is that right?
It is, and Manny, thanks for this opportunity to invite some of your listeners who may be able to drive up to Columbia. We're having a luncheon on Monday, September 9th, and you can get all the information at showmeinstitute.org. Click on the Events tab, and you can register there and call with any questions. But Gary Nolan, the well-known former colleague of yours, the Columbia radio host, is going to be giving a talk on the history of the income tax. It's called The Income Tax from Lincoln to Obama. And it's at the University of Missouri Reynolds Alumni Center from noon to 1 on Monday the 9th. And again, if any of your listeners can join this Show Me Institute forum, go to our website, showmeinstitute.org, and you can click on events and register from there. We'd like to invite everybody who can to join us that day. It is a lunch lecture. It costs $20, and it's going to be a great time, I think.
David Stokes with the Show Me Institute. As always, thank you so much for the time and the visit on Show Me at the Lake. If folks would like to find out more, not only about the Show Me Institute, but also yourself, please give us your contact information.
Well, Manny, a great talk as always. I enjoy Show Me at the Lake so very much, and your listeners can follow me on Twitter at David C. Stokes, and they can visit our blog each day for sort of running daily commentary on Missouri issues at showmedaily.org.
David Stokes with the Show Me Institute. We will visit again next Thursday right here on the Morning Magazine on KRMS. Have a good week.
Thanks, Manny.